it's been about 20 years from the Durban conference that was in 2001, where all the countries, including India, also pledged to end racial discrimination, and it was recognized as a major problem to be addressed. Since then and now, we have till recently the SDGs in 2015, where 193 countries got together and again pledged through one of its targets that we would be ending together as a world. We would be ending forced labor, bonded labor, modern slavery, and particularly child labor by 2025, and forced labor, human trafficking by 2030. So this is a time, there's 5 years left for ending child labor, there's 10 years left for ending forced labor. So we have to see where do we stand today, and therefore what are the next steps, who are the people who are most affected, whether actually people, as we had pledged that no one would be left behind. So are people left behind? Where are we today? So that's the it's the time that civil society and the governments are looking at taking us at stock taking about where are we today. With this, at this moment, what we thought that the way we see it, that modern slavery is very closely linked with caste, and that is not something that the governments also recognize. And this is an issue which we would want it to be more visibilized. We would like to bring more evidence where it exists and bring out the gaps of evidence, because we see a very close relationship of the issue of caste, the identity of caste, people with communities discriminated on work and descent, and their engagement and exploitation in different forms of modern slavery. So that is the significance of the conference. Here we are gathered for 2 days to try and see this issue from different perspectives about who are the we know that Dalits and other ethnic groups are involved, other marginalized groups, but Dalits also particularly. And so how do we make this issue more visible for governments to take an action, and to point out the gaps, learn from each other and everyone's experiences, and then we hope to take our submission to our different governments. So we've done this study for South Asia study covering 5 countries, which is Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. So in which we've studied who are the Dalits, and every country don't recognize by the name Dalits. We know that the word came from India. It was more popularized in India, but today the word Dalit is more like a assertion of on resistance and assertion. It's must become an identity marker. So countries like Sri Lanka don't recognize the word. It's more at a UN level. It's more about communities discriminated on work and descent. So by whatever name we call, we know that there are people who are discriminated because of their birth, because of their descent, and that's how work was assigned to people since generations together, since centuries. And it should end. Work should not, occupation should not be assigned because one is born into a particular family. So that's what the India study is, the South Asia study is about. The conference is also presenting the global analysis and perspective on communities based on work and descent in various other countries. I would start with 4 critical observations from the South Asia study. It's not like a revelation, people have spoken about this, but what came across when we documented the study is purely based on secondary research. So what we could put together was these 4 critical points which really came across. First is that when we talk about the causative factors, poverty and economics is usually portrayed as the prominent factors. Our claim is that, and organizations who have been working on communities discriminated on work and descent over the last 3 decades or 4 decades, is that while poverty is a prominent causative factor, it is not just mere poverty. It's not economics. It is the identity of the person, which is actually the caste of a person and the family, and which over years and years of systemic discrimination adds on to the poverty and marginalization of the families and the communities. So it keeps on adding to the marginalization that the person is going through. So poverty and other intersectional factors are there. There is a combination, of course, but who are the people who are most affected by it? It is the people from caste backgrounds. It is the tribal populations, and that is the reason why we need to view the whole the concept of modern slavery from the view of caste lenses and not from the view of just economics. That is the first, and it's nothing new. It has been spoken about, but it's really coming across very concretely through the study. The second is that caste doesn't die its own natural death. So if governments or if organizations don't talk about it, or have a welfare approach, it doesn't mean that caste is dead. And this is this comes across very clearly in cases of Sri Lanka, where Sri Lanka since 1911 has not been documenting, in the census, the caste social group is not being documented. The idea, which is good, is that in a way that that people would be living in harmony, and caste would take its, in due time it would die its own natural death, but it doesn't happen. What happens is that it becomes silenced, and but the discrimination persists. So discrimination is there. People do face various types. People over there as well are in slavery-like conditions in plantation work, in almost 100% in sanitation-based work, who are Dalits over there. Discrimination is there, but the caste word or the category is not there. So even if by not calling it caste doesn't mean that caste dies, and it doesn't take care of itself. That's another observation. And it's also, I took the example of Sri Lanka, but it's also true for other countries. And then another thing is, even for Bangladesh, if you see, they are not categorized as especially as as Dalits. So you find them among the Muslim Dalits, you find among the Hindu Dalits, but caste is not recognized as a term even in the census. So how do you identify the people for better policy making? So it doesn't take care of itself. In India, there is a 1950 constitution order, presidential constitution order, in which Christians and Christians and Muslim Dalits are, because of their conversion, they are not recognized as Dalits anymore. So what do they do in the process? They lose out on the benefits, but they are faced and subjected to all the discrimination that a caste system subjects them to. So it doesn't die down on its own. That's the second critical observation that we have made. Then it's also that it is the responsibility, because when we talk about slavery-like conditions, there's a very fragile line with the violation of labor laws. So it is not just a social responsibility of corporates. We feel that, and we claim that it is the business ethics and accountability to ensure that their supply chains there are due diligence in supply chains, and that it is followed, that business practices are ethical, so that products are not sourced from practices which engage bonded labor. So I could remember three. In terms of modern slavery and slavery-like practices in South Asia, there are two categories that we have seen, and this is again from secondary research. So it is forced labor and forced marriages. So forced labor is basically, it includes bonded labor practices. It includes caste-based occupation like sanitation work and manual scavenging, which is banned in India but still practiced. It includes human trafficking, Then sexual slavery, which basically means forced sex work, commercial sex work. It means ritualistic sexual slavery practices, and also some other forms of sexual slavery. And then it also talks about child labor. So these are the forced labor categories that we have studied in the 5 different countries. Then another form of modern slavery that we talk about is forced marriages. And here forced marriage, we are not looking at it from the lenses of just child marriage, because we have not been able to, as in that issue itself is very huge. We are looking at forced marriages here from the perspective of bride trafficking, where girls and women are trafficked from some source states for commercial sexual exploitation. So the concept is, so they are married, the marriage is an excuse so that they can be trafficked for sex work. Another type of bride trafficking which is there, which exists evidence, is for marital relations. So states where the sex ratio is low, so there are not enough women for wives, and therefore they are trafficked for this. And then there is the third type, evidence of which is found in Pakistan, is of forced conversion. So marriages because of forced conversion. So these are the 2 broad areas, forced labor and forced marriage, that we have seen. So when we are talking about forced labor, so it's mostly in the agriculture sector and non-agricultural sector. So there are some traditional forms of forced labor which was more feudalistic. What has changed over the years is it is illegal now. So there is there is an illegality of slavery, but the control remains the same. So this in the modern times, it is more about control based forced labor, and which continues. There is also a third which we see, that presently we are dealing with modern forms of slavery. We also see the danger of future forms of slavery in the next coming years. So when we talk about agricultural forced labor, traditional and modern forms of forced labor, in India you have practices like in Karnataka you find bitti chakri, where a person will have to devote a few hours of their time to do free labor, unpaid labor in people's houses, where they do pick up cow dung and clean cattle, feed them, etc., and they don't get paid for it. And in festival time and occasions they have to do it for a stretch of days. You have a Jajmani system which is dying down. You have Siri and Pali in Punjab. So these are all forms of unpaid forced labor in agriculture that exists. Informal sector, which is almost 90% of our working population, is in informal sector work, and industries which engage a lot of forced labor and Dalits in that are you see in construction work, in brick kiln sector, and evidence of in India itself about 80 to 88%. When I say this range, because different studies have found it, in brick kiln sector are Dalits. And in Pakistan you have the same, where in brick kiln sector they are Dalit Christians. So while in the census they are not captured as Dalits, because Christians are not recognized because of conversion as Dalits, the discrimination is there. So socially they are Dalit Christians who are being subjected to this. So informal sector captures that. Carpet making in Pakistan has, in India, textile industry, and in Bangladesh. India, there is direct evidence of Dalit girls in textile and garment making. So there's a scheme called Sumangali scheme, where for 3 years they are almost bonded, restricted, no movement from hostels. They stay in hostels, and we say bonded because, and again this is what the terminology is of slavery like conditions, because their restrictions are they are restricted to move. They are paid at the end of 3 years, so if they move out or something happens, they are not also paid for it. So and these are all 100% or almost 100% Dalits. In Bangladesh, while there is no evidence of them being Dalits because census doesn't record as Dalits, but about 80% of women in the ready-made garment, they are women, and they face various kinds of atrocities. So in the study where there are many examples where we have captured different forms where there is evidence of Dalits being recruited and where there is a very high probability, but there is no way that the government data does not capture, any independent studies do not capture the identity of the person. So we cannot claim that they are Dalits, but there is a high probability, like in human trafficking, in forced sex work, in child labor. It's a humongous task ahead. Caste-based discrimination, which is at the core of it, it has existed since centuries, and a few decades of special measures or affirmative action is not going to take away. And but we have to be, and governments have to stay at it. The most urgent need and what is coming out as recommendations is that, first of all, de-link religion and caste in countries where because of a person having converted, the Dalit status or the caste status is taken away. So de-link religion, and government sanctioned studies have given similar recommendations in India as well. So de-link, then have discrimination laws. We have, India has a good by way of ST/SC POA Act, we have a good anti-discrimination law. We have Untouchability Act in Nepal, but other countries do not have. So where countries who do not have anti-discrimination law, so that perpetrators can be brought around to it. So these are the we have to keep at it. We have to keep highlighting. One of the another what I had mentioned earlier was that evidence has to continue. We have to continue to build evidence about it. So especially, and it is obviously a challenge about how that would be done, but this has to be consciously done because people affected are Dalits, people affected are ethnic groups. So when rescues are done, let's say by organizations, so the identity has to be captured. When surveys are done by governments, and bonded labor survey should be done regularly. It is stipulated by law. So surveys need to be done as per legal stipulations, and the caste identity ought to be captured so that it assists in effective policy making. If you know who are the people affected, then it makes more sense, and it is easy to, and it's more you can have appropriate policies which is targeting them.